You were never meant to fit in. Because what you carry, this sight, isn't safe. It sees through masks, pierces illusions, and exposes truths people spend their whole lives trying to bury. And that kind of perception doesn't earn you praise. It makes you a threat. You've always felt it, haven't you? That strange discomfort in rooms full of smiling people. That tension behind compliments. That sense that conversations are happening on one level while something else, something unspoken, rattles beneath the surface. They tell you you're too intense, too sensitive, too analytical. But Thoth would say otherwise. He would tell you this isn't sensitivity, it's a sacred sight. This video isn't about mythology, it's not about gods or symbols, it's about you, your perception, your exile, your gift. And what happens when the world sees someone who can no longer play along? You're not broken, you've simply begun to remember, and once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You've always sensed something was off. Long before you had the words to describe it, you felt it. In the classroom, where everyone else seemed content to recite answers without asking questions. At family gatherings, where smiles hid tension and silence swallowed truth. You knew. You didn't know how or why, but you knew. People weren't saying what they meant. The world didn't feel real. And you felt like a glitch in a program everyone else had agreed to run. Thoth calls this sacred sight, a rare tuning of perception that lets you hear the whispers behind the words, the fractures in the performance, the weight behind the laughter. It's not psychic, not magical. It's consciousness that hasn't been numbed, a form of seeing that doesn't rely on eyes. You were never meant to play along with the surface-level game of life, because your nature was always calibrated to depth, not as a choice, as a blueprint. But the world doesn't welcome this kind of perception. It labels it, diagnoses it, pathologizes it. You were probably told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional, maybe even unstable, but that was never the truth. You weren't malfunctioning. You were simply living in a frequency too rare to be recognized by the average receiver. You weren't reacting too much. You were perceiving too clearly. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. They felt it, even if they couldn't explain it. They felt the difference when you were around. The way conversations shifted, the way discomfort rose in your presence. You see, sacred sight doesn't just show you the truth. It forces others to confront what they've buried. And that is terrifying. Because most people have built their entire identities on stories they've never questioned. You came into the world with questions that broke those stories apart. And they hated you for it, even if they didn't know why. But Thoth reminds us, this isn't a curse of punishment. It's a curse of awakening. A painful, unchosen, relentless gift that strips away illusion, not just from the world, but from yourself. And that's where it really hurts. Because once you start to see what others can't, you begin to realize how much of your life was built on pretending. Pretending to be okay. Pretending to fit in. Pretending you didn't notice what was glaringly obvious to you but invisible to everyone else. There's a reason you're exhausted, not from effort, but from effortlessness, from seeing what others miss, from pretending not to, from questioning your sanity just to keep the peace, from carrying the weight of truth in a world built on denial. Some knowledge is too raw, too deep, and too disruptive to speak openly. That's why we created Insights Academy, our free newsletter, where we share what can't be said here. Sign up through the link below and receive a free copy of the 𝓿𝐿𝐼, only available for a limited time. And this is where the transformation begins. Not when you silence your sight, but when you stop apologizing for it. You were never meant to be blind. You were never meant to swallow the script. You were born to see, clearly, deeply, dangerously. And now, you're remembering. That sensation you've been carrying isn't madness. It's awareness trying to break through the fog. And once it does, everything changes. There's a tension that follows you into every room, and it's not your imagination. You've felt it when people go quiet as you approach. You've sensed it in the way their smiles stiffen, their energy shifts, Their eyes avoid yours just a little too quickly. You don't even have to say anything. Your presence alone disrupts the illusion they've worked so hard to maintain. Thoth calls this the mirror effect. Not because you reflect people's beauty, but because you reflect their shadow. The parts they've disowned, the pain they've suppressed, the truths they've buried so deep they've convinced themselves they no longer exist. And when someone like you walks in, someone who sees without trying, who feels without permission, it's like placing a mirror in front of someone who's forgotten their face. They look away not because you're flawed, but because you're clear. You were never trying to be intense, never trying to expose anyone. But your energy carries truth, and truth always makes noise where there's denial. People sense it, even if they can't name it. Your perception is felt before it's understood. That's why you've been accused of being too much, too emotional, too direct. They weren't describing you. They were describing what you made them feel. They just didn't have the vocabulary to separate your presence from their discomfort. And so, they made you the problem. This is the loneliness no one talks about, the isolation that comes from being the mirror, because being seen is rare. But being the one who sees, that's even rarer and infinitely heavier. You can't unsee what you see. You can't play dumb just to belong. And you can't force anyone to meet you in the deep end if they're terrified of drowning in their own truth. So, what happens? You start to shrink. You dim your light. You bite your tongue. You pretend not to notice the cracks in their stories, the contradiction in their tone, the silent screams behind their eyes. You pretend to laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You learn to nod along with conversations that feel like slow death, not because you're weak, but because you're tired of being the threat. But Thoth offers a different perspective. He says the mirror isn't a weapon. It's a gift, a rare, sacred function in a world built on performance. To be the one who sees is not to be better. It is to carry a responsibility, one that often goes unacknowledged and unrewarded, but remains essential. Because mirrors don't lie, they don't flatter, they don't conform. They simply reflect what is. And in a culture addicted to illusion, that kind of honesty is nothing short of revolutionary. You've likely noticed how many relationships have collapsed under the weight of your presence. How friendships dissolved not because you did anything wrong, but because you stopped playing along. You stopped pretending. You stopped making people comfortable at the expense of your truth. And when you did, they left. Not because you changed, but because your refusal to lie made their lies unbearable. You've probably felt guilt for this, wondered if you should be softer, quieter, smaller, but the world doesn't need you to shrink. It needs you to be exact, clear, awake, because in a sea of masks, you are a mirror. And while that will cost you shallow acceptance, it will attract something far more powerful: resonance, realness, truth. And one day, someone will stand before you and not flinch. They will hold your gaze, not because they are unafraid of what they see, but because they, too, have become the mirror. And in that moment, you will remember, you were never too much. You were simply surrounded by too little. There's a kind of exhaustion you carry that sleep can't fix. It settles deep in your bones, follows you into silence, and lingers even in moments that should feel restful. You've probably tried to explain it to people before, how even doing nothing can leave you drained, how certain environments leave you hollow, how being around others doesn't just tire you out. It depletes something vital. But most people don't understand, because most people don't feel the world the way you do. Thoth calls this the sacred wound, not because it breaks you, but because it marks you. It's the consequence of seeing what others can't, of absorbing what others deny, of carrying a perception too deep for a shallow world. You're not just tired because life is busy. You're tired because you're constantly absorbing emotional frequencies no one else even registers. That tension in the air, you feel it before anyone speaks. That smile hiding grief. You sense it before they even know it themselves. That person who seems calm but is boiling inside. You feel it in your chest, like it's your own storm. You weren't taught to do this. You didn't choose it, but your nervous system, your energy field. Your very essence acts like a tuning fork to unspoken truths. And while that may sound poetic, in practice it's brutal. Because while others go about their day oblivious, you're carrying the emotional weight of every room you enter. This is why solitude isn't just a preference, it's a requirement. You need it like oxygen. Not because you dislike people, but because you need space to hear your own soul beneath the noise. You need time to release what isn't yours. Because most of what you carry, those sudden mood swings, that unexplained anxiety, that grief that appears from nowhere, isn't coming from within you. It's psychic debris. Thoth explains that those who see clearly often feel deeply, and those who feel deeply often end up as emotional alchemists, unconsciously transmuting pain that isn't theirs. The sacred wound isn't always visible. It often wears the disguise of depression, social fatigue, even chronic illness. But at its core, it is the ache of living in a world that hasn't made space for your level of consciousness. It is the pain of knowing what people are really saying when they speak, the ache of sensing the disconnect between someone's words and their soul, the grief of being surrounded by performance when all you want is truth. And so you withdraw, not out of superiority, but self-preservation. You learn to avoid small talk, loud rooms, and shallow connections, not because you're antisocial, but because they make you feel like you're drowning. Yet this wound, as painful as it is, holds the key to your power. Thoth teaches that it's not a scar of weakness, but a sigil of responsibility, because it means you've retained your depth. You didn't shut down, you didn't numb out, you didn't trade awareness for comfort, and that makes you rare. Still, it's lonely, because most people don't want to feel, let alone feel everything. They want distraction, certainty, numbness. You crave presence, meaning, realness. And in a world built on avoidance, that makes you an outlier, but not an accident. The sacred wound carves you open, yes, but only so more light can enter. It softens you, refines you, awakens you. And eventually, when you stop seeing it as a flaw and begin honoring it as the initiatory path it is, something shifts. The exhaustion becomes discernment. The sensitivity becomes wisdom. And the isolation becomes clarity. You were never meant to carry the world's pain, but you were meant to recognize it, to see it clearly, and to choose what to do with it. The wound is not who you are, but it is how you found the truth. And that truth, it's what makes you powerful. You've spent most of your life translating yourself, filtering your truth, softening your instincts, and breaking yourself into fragments that fit whatever room you're in. One version for your family, one for work, one for friends. None of them quite right, all of them slightly off. And every time you do it, every time you dilute what you feel or mute what you see, it costs you something. A small betrayal, a little grief, another layer between you and the truth of who you are. Thoth calls this living between worlds. It's not just about spiritual duality, it's about psychological exile. You exist in a space too complex for binaries, too honest for shallow roles. But the world doesn't reward truth, it rewards performance. So, you learn to perform, to participate in conversations that made you feel empty, to laugh at things that didn't amuse you, to chase validation that never quite filled the gap. Not because you're fake, but because, at some point, you believed that being real would cost you love. And maybe it did. Maybe the first time you spoke too openly, too honestly, too clearly, it frightened someone. Maybe they recoiled, maybe they left. Maybe they told you to tone it down. So you did. Not because you stopped seeing, but because you were tired of seeing alone. This fragmentation, it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like someone who's functioning, smiling, ticking boxes. But inside, it's a slow erosion, a hollowing out. Because you can only live as a fraction of yourself for so long before the pieces start to slip through your fingers. Your body feels it first. That strange fatigue, the tightness in your chest, the unexplainable heaviness. You chalk it up to stress, but it's not. It's the weight of pretending, the drag of constantly stepping in and out of your own skin. You don't want to perform anymore. You don't want to rehearse your personality. You want to speak without decoding yourself first. You want to be seen in your entirety and not scare people away. But the truth is, most people aren't ready for the full you, because the full you doesn't fit into their narratives. The full you asks questions that unravel comfort. The full you doesn't apologize for truth, and that's threatening. So, you find yourself stuck, too awake to sleep, too sensitive to numb, too honest to lie, but too exhausted to fight. And this limbo, the space between suppression and expression, is where your soul begins to ache the loudest, because it knows, it remembers, it came here to be whole. Thoth doesn't promise this journey will be easy. In fact, he says it will break you open repeatedly, but not to destroy you, to unmake the lies you were told to live. Because each time you refuse to split, each time you speak your truth without a script, each time you honor your perception over popularity, you move closer to integration. Integration isn't perfection. It's not about being fully healed or fearless. It's about being congruent, aligned, whole, even when the world around you prefers fragments, even when the culture applauds masks, even when your honesty means losing people who only ever loved your performance. Living between worlds is disorienting, but you weren't meant to pick one. You were meant to be a bridge between surface and depth, between noise and truth, between illusion and clarity. You carry both because you are meant to transmute one into the other, and that begins when you stop splitting yourself to survive and start standing as one. There is no script for who you are becoming, only the pulse of your own truth and the courage to follow it, even if it costs you everything that made you feel safe but never whole. There are moments, fleeting, sacred, where you meet someone and the world goes quiet. You don't know how you know them, but you do. It's not logic, it's not memory, it's resonance. A deep, wordless recognition that bypasses introductions and speaks straight to the soul. No performance, no small talk, just two frequencies remembering themselves in each other. Thoth calls this sacred synchronicity, not coincidence, not fate, but the gravitational pull of rare minds finally crossing paths in a world that's tried its best to scatter them. You may have gone years without it, decades even, moving through life like a ghost among the living, waiting for someone to speak a language you hadn't realized you'd stopped trying to speak. And then, without warning, you feel it. A stranger who feels like home, a look that holds depth instead of judgment, a conversation that doesn't drain you but revives you. It's not common, it's not easy, but when it happens, you know, because suddenly, you're not explaining yourself anymore. You're being seen. This recognition is rare, because your perception is rare. You're not just sensitive, you're tuned to a wavelength most people have never accessed. It's not superiority, it's simply difference. You notice the subtleties others miss. You detect the shadow beneath the smile. You hear the tremor behind the words. And because of that, most interactions feel hollow. Most connections feel like you're only allowed to bring a piece of yourself, never the whole. But when you meet someone who sees, who feels, who carries that same silent ache of perception, it's like finding proof that you're not alone in the wilderness after all. You don't need many of these people. In fact, too many would overwhelm the sacredness of it. Thoth teaches that those who carry the mirror, the ones who see, feel, and reflect the truth, are scattered intentionally, like seeds planted across timelines. When one awakens, it sparks another. When two connect, the veil lifts faster. It's not about forming crowds. It's about weaving a quiet web of remembrance, one soul at a time. And when you meet them, these others who were also born with sight, you feel it immediately. There's a softness, an honesty, a depth, and an unspoken grief, because they too have lived between worlds. They too have been misunderstood, mislabeled, mistaken for too much or not enough. But here, in this rare connection, you both remember that your sensitivity was never a weakness. It was a compass. In a society that glorifies detachment, your ability to feel deeply is revolutionary. In a culture that rewards masks, your willingness to be seen is sacred. These rare recognitions aren't just about friendship, they're about restoration. You restore each other's faith in reality, that there are still people who get it, that your path isn't madness, that the pain wasn't pointless. You won't always get to keep these people close. Sometimes they appear just long enough to awaken something in you, to remind you of what's real, and then life pulls you in different directions. But the imprint remains, the frequency stays, and it anchors you in a deeper trust that you are not, and never were, walking alone. This is why the system isolates you, not just physically, but mentally. It convinces you you're the only one who sees. It makes your depth feel like dysfunction. But the moment you connect with someone who sees what you see, that illusion dissolves. You realize how much of your life has been spent shrinking yourself just to survive in a world that doesn't understand your design. But you were never meant to be understood by everyone. Only by the few who carry the same frequency. Those who see you without translation. Who feel your silence like a symphony. Who remind you that your mirror isn't broken, it's just rare. At some point in your life, maybe more than once, you've asked the question, why am I like this? Why do I feel everything so deeply? Why can't I unsee what I've seen, unfeel what I've felt? Why does the world that others seem to thrive in feel so foreign to me? Like I'm walking through a dream I never agreed to enter. These aren't just questions of confusion. They are spiritual alarms, signals, evidence that your purpose is not something you choose. It's something that chooses you. Thoth speaks clearly. If you are burdened with sight, you are also charged with purpose. And that purpose is not optional. It will haunt you until you answer it. You can try to suppress it, numb it, bury it beneath routine and distraction, but it will rise. It always does. Because it's not a goal. It's your nature. This is why you've always felt that tension between who you're told to be and who you truly are. Not because you're broken, because you were never built for normality. Normal lives are lived by those who don't question the structure, but you were designed to challenge it, to hold a mirror to it, to rewire the world from the inside out, and that isn't comfortable. It isn't linear. It doesn't come with a neat roadmap or applause. It comes with confusion, alienation, and the crushing weight of too muchness. But it also comes with the quiet knowing that you were sent here for something more. If your life feels directionless, abstract, or undefined, it's not because you lack purpose. It's because your purpose doesn't fit into the template society offers. You were not meant to be just another worker, consumer, follower. You were meant to serve as a bridge between dimensions, between what is seen and what is hidden, what is accepted and what is true. And bridges don't belong fully to one side or the other. They exist in the space between. That's where you've always lived. This in-between space can feel isolating, like you're stuck in transit, never fully arriving. But Thoth reminds us that this is the exact posture needed for transformation. You stand at the threshold because you are the threshold. And that role, while painful, is sacred. You are the translation point where the old world cracks and the new one begins to form. It's no coincidence that your suffering intensifies when you resist this path. When you deny your depth, your vision, your inner knowing, life becomes heavier. That heaviness isn't punishment, it's misalignment. It's your soul screaming through the silence, begging you to stop conforming to a path that was never made for you. But embracing this purpose doesn't mean grandiosity. It doesn't mean becoming famous or praised or followed. It means becoming real, alive, awake. It means speaking when silence is demanded, feeling when numbness is rewarded, creating when conformity is enforced. It means trusting your perception even when it alienates you. Because your truth, once voiced, ripples outward in ways you'll never fully see. You were entrusted with a different kind of vision, not to separate you from others, but to illuminate what they've forgotten. Your existence is a message, a disruption, a chance for the collective to remember what it buried long ago. And yes, that comes with cost, with loss, with rejection. But it also comes with clarity, alignment, and the deep spiritual knowing that you are finally becoming who you were always meant to be. And remember, those who carry sight are rarely understood in their time, but time catches up. The world may not be ready for your truth today, but truth has patience, purpose has endurance, and you were born for this. There comes a point when seeing is no longer enough, when insight alone becomes heavy, stagnant, even suffocating. When you're forced to ask the question, now that I see, what am I meant to do with it? Because perception without action breeds despair. And Thoth makes it clear, your awareness was never meant to be passive. It is an instrument of alchemy, to see the shadows of the world, its lies, its illusions, its suffering, is not a punishment. It is a call to transmute, to turn darkness into depth, to not just expose the system, but to evolve beyond it. You were not cursed with awareness, you were entrusted with it. And the weight you feel isn't a burden of brokenness, it's the weight of unprocessed power. That means your perception is not just a mirror, it's a catalyst. You don't just reflect the hidden layers of reality, you have the potential to reshape them. But the system would never teach you that. It wants you to believe that you're too small, too fragile, too unqualified to hold that kind of power. It would rather you numb yourself with distractions than recognize the true nature of your consciousness. Because the moment you realize your inner vision can alter the outer world, the illusion begins to break. Think about what happens when you enter a space and speak truth others are avoiding. At first, there's resistance, discomfort, maybe even mockery. But something always shifts. That's not coincidence. That's energy moving. That's the beginning of transmutation. Your words carry a frequency that pierces through layers of programming. Not because you're trying to convince anyone, but because you're embodying a frequency that others have forgotten. And that frequency is contagious. But this alchemy isn't easy. It demands more than awareness. It demands discipline, mastery, emotional intelligence. You must learn how to hold what you see without drowning in it, to transform pain into purpose, not resentment, to discern between what's yours to carry and what you've absorbed unconsciously. Because the world will hand you its chaos if you don't know how to guard your field, and no one teaches you how to do that, not in school, not in society, but Thoth does. He teaches that alchemy begins in the inner temple, in how you respond to fear, manipulation, distraction, in how you choose presence over panic, intuition over impulse. It starts in the smallest choices: what you consume, what you allow, what you ignore, and what you amplify. You don't need to change the whole world, but you do need to purify your corner of it. Because every act of clarity, no matter how small, disrupts the spell of unconsciousness. You were given this sight for a reason. You were meant to hold the mirror, not just for others, but for yourself, to constantly ask, where am I still asleep? What am I still afraid to see? That's how the power grows. That's how perception becomes alchemy, not by knowing everything, but by continuously seeing deeper and choosing to act from what you see. This is the sacred responsibility that comes with sight. You don't just observe the pain of the world, you feel it, and that feeling is your raw material. Let it shape you. Let it soften you without weakening you. Let it teach you how to hold space for others, not with pity, but with presence. Because those who see clearly are needed not to preach, but to hold, not to save, but to awaken, not to dominate, but to transmute. There's a reason awakening often feels lonely. You are walking ahead of the collective rhythm. But as Thoth reminds us, the alchemist is never truly alone. They are simply ahead of the echo. And when the world begins to catch up, and it will need those who held the vision steady during the darkest hour. The world taught you to chase a version of success that was never yours. A version measured in money, validation, applause, and control. They gave you a map, college, job, mortgage, retirement, and told you it was the way. But what happens when your soul refuses to follow it? when your inner compass points not to comfort, but to something much stranger, harder, and more sacred. Thoth says this dissonance you feel, the conflict between what you were told to want and what your spirit actually longs for, is the first sign that your purpose cannot be domesticated. Your success was never meant to look like everyone else's. You were not sent here to rise through their systems. You were born to question them, break them, and build something entirely new from the rubble. But that kind of path comes with cost. You'll be misunderstood. You'll doubt yourself. You'll feel lost, not because you're failing, but because you're stepping into a role no one ever explained to you. A blueprint that doesn't yet exist. There are no billboards for this kind of life. No mentors on magazine covers. No courses to follow. Because what you carry, your perception, your clarity, your creative fire, has no precedent. And that's what makes it powerful. The more you try to conform to the world's definition of meaning, the more alienated you'll feel. Because you were never meant to fit into a role. You were meant to forge one. And that requires deep surrender, not to a plan, but to a frequency. Not to certainty, but to trust. To live not by external milestones, but by internal resonance. To know that if your soul is on fire, even if your life looks messy on the outside, you're aligned. Success, for you, must be redefined. It's not about being understood by the masses, but about being recognized by the few who speak your frequency. It's not about climbing ladders, but about building bridges between mind and heart, truth and illusion, light and shadow. Your purpose is not a job description. It's an energetic signature, a vibration you carry that changes the atmosphere wherever you go. You've likely felt it already. That moment when someone hears your words and something inside them shifts. Or when a glance, a silence, a question you ask breaks open a truth they didn't know they were hiding. That's purpose in motion. Not loud, not grand, but catalytic. And Thoth reminds us, when you embody your truth fully, without needing to be accepted or applauded, you become a lighthouse for others who've been wandering in the dark. You don't need to guide everyone. You only need to stay lit. The ones meant to find you will, not through marketing, through magnetism. So ask yourself, right now, what does success feel like? Not what it's supposed to look like, but what your body knows to be true. Does it feel like peace, creative flow, deep connection, the courage to live unmasked, even when it scares you? That's your North Star. Let go of chasing symbols. Let go of trying to prove your worth through productivity or performance. Real power isn't about how much you do. It's about how fully you show up, in your truth, in your softness, in your refusal to shrink for the comfort of others. And remember, when your vision doesn't make sense to the world, it's not a flaw in the vision. It's a sign that the world hasn't caught up yet. Now is the moment to make a decision. To stop measuring your life with someone else's ruler. To stop shrinking your frequency to fit someone else's expectations. To stop waiting for permission to live as you truly are. And if any part of you still doubts whether you're on the right path, look at the pain, the friction, the tension, the restlessness. That's not dysfunction. That's your soul calling. That's sacred resistance to the unnatural. And buried inside that discomfort is direction. You're not lost. You're just remembering a way of being that was never supposed to be forgotten. A way of living that doesn't trade authenticity for approval. A purpose that doesn't ask you to perform, but to be, fully, fiercely, freely. To see what others don't is a burden, but it's also a sacred initiation. Thoth never promised that sight would bring peace, only truth. And truth, by its very nature, disrupts. It doesn't always heal right away. Sometimes, it first breaks. What you carry isn't just insight, it's alchemy. The ability to perceive what lies beneath the surface and transmute it into meaning, wisdom, and clarity. That power terrifies the world because it can't be bought, packaged, or controlled. You've probably noticed, the more you see, the more invisible you feel. Because people don't know how to meet what they refuse to confront. And so you become a mirror they're afraid to look into. But that mirror, the one you carry, isn't here to hurt them. It's here to wake them. And it starts by waking you. There is no point in seeing through the matrix if you still seek validation from it. That's the trap many fall into. Awakening just enough to sense the illusion, but not far enough to stop needing its approval. The true shift happens when you stop performing. When you stop asking, "How do I appear?" and start asking, "What am I here to reveal?" Your role isn't to blend in or explain yourself. It's to become so fully aligned with your truth that you become a living permission slip for others to do the same. That's the alchemy. You don't argue with the illusion, you outgrow it. You don't convince others to wake up, you embody wakefulness and let that presence do the talking. You don't chase visibility, you radiate so loudly from your authenticity that those meant to find you will. And yes, it's lonely at first. The space between leaving the old story and fully claiming the new one can feel hollow. But that emptiness isn't a void, it's a womb. The place where your deeper self begins to emerge, not masked, not modified, not fragmented, but whole. That's the becoming Thoth speaks of. Not something given to you by others, but something remembered from within. The world is waking up, but it's doing so painfully, clumsily, and often violently. Systems are collapsing, narratives are fraying, and as that chaos unfolds, your presence becomes more necessary than ever. You are not here to fix everything. You are here to hold the mirror steady while it all falls apart. That is not passivity, it is sacred service. So when the world gaslights you, when it tells you you're too much, too intense, too weird, smile, because all it means is that you've slipped beyond the reach of its control. And that is freedom. Use your sight, not to dominate, not to correct, but to illuminate. Let your life become the message. Let your presence speak what words cannot. Because in the end, your clarity, your frequency, your courage to be real in a world of masks, that is the revolution. And now you know the truth. This gift of sight isn't just a trait, it's a mission. And the moment you accept it fully, you begin to magnetize others who carry the same frequency. The rare ones. The ones who've also been walking alone, questioning everything, seeing through the noise. When they find you, something clicks. That resonance, the unspoken knowing, is sacred. Protect it. You were never meant to walk this path alone. And you won't. As more of us awaken, the illusion will lose its grip. The more you embody the truth, the more the lie begins to crumble. That is the essence of alchemy, not theory, transformation. So what now? You continue, you question, you trust your inner knowing more than external noise. You stay close to those who make you feel seen, not just admired. And you choose, again and again, to live as who you are, not who they told you to be. But if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the end. It's the beginning of something ancient rising again through you, something that refuses to be silenced, diluted, or sold. And if you've felt the resonance in these words, don't stop here.